Well guys, hope you're well. I've got another project come through this morning. I've got my Honda carburetor in the background there. I've just fitted a 2-into-1 exhaust on that. It's seems to go really well now. But anyway, back to my video. This is something I had one like this years ago, and I ran it once at Donington Park, and it was a fantastic little thing. Well, it's quite big actually, but I've always wanted another one, and I got one a few years ago, and I managed to get some bits and bobs for it, and I've done it up really pristine condition. And I couldn't bear to run it. I had spare bodies and stuff like that, but I just couldn't bear to run it. I made a starter stand and everything, you know. And then the guy made me an offer, so I sold it, and I've regretted it all the time, you know. And these things are so hard to find parts for, blah blah. But one actually turned up on eBay the other night, and it was a good price, and I just didn't hesitate. I just buy it now, wallop. And it turned up this morning. Let's get rid of my cup. Oh, it's very warm over here in the UK. I've got a little thing to prop it up on. Now, I'm sure if you've watched my other videos. Let's move the camera up just slightly. Right, there she is. I'm sure if you watch my other videos, I think I did, I'm not sure I did a build on this one, but I think I have done a video on all my bikes, and I think this one was in it, I'm not sure. But this is kind of late 80s, maybe, early 90s, and it was kind of the first, I wouldn't say it was the first RC bike, because I think Kyosho brought the Race Rider out, which I have, and I think the little YZ250, which I hadn't sold, I believe they was out before that. And no doubt some of you guys know other bikes that was out before this. But this was like brought out as a proper racing bike by DWA. They made some lovely, like, 5th scale and 1/4 scale, some lovely cars from back in the day. You know, before the 5th scale sort of took off in the late 90s, which I was doing at the time, before that, especially in the States, you had a lot of DWAs, you know, lovely, really nicely built, you know. And they brought out this, like, competition motorcycle, which I saw one in a model shop. I saw one, and it was in like this condition. It had no engine in it, and because I had like the little Kyosho's at that time, the Mark 1, I sort of fell in love with it. Didn't have a lot of money in it, but it had most of it on there, and I managed to run it as it was, and it was really nice and stable, and you know, whatever. But they did change the steering arrangement on this, which I probably talked to you about before. It's, you know, most bikes in the early days, which I think this is a really early one because it's got leaning forks. It hasn't got a direct steer set up on it, it's got leaning forks. But it's quite easy to change the direct steering, and it will transform the bike now and, you know. I think I did a story about, you know, when guys were racing these in championships and all that, and suddenly someone changed it to direct steering, and they was like 2 laps quicker than anyone else. And then of course obviously everyone changed in, and then I think DWA actually bought out a kit where you could alter it to direct steering from the leaning steering. The leaning steering is quite complicated, but the, you know, direct steering is very simple, and it's actually used on bikes now. The direct steering, you know, it hasn't changed. And it's the most accurate type of steering you can get. All the early Kyoshos all had leaning forks. I've kept one standard, but I've changed all mine to direct steering by adding another servo, and it makes such a difference to the bike, you know. don't use crash bars or anything like that. They grip and they just go around lovely. With the modern tyres you get these days, they go lovely. Anyway, talking about tyres on this one, overall this is just how I like to get them. You know, it's just got dust on it. You know, it's all there. It's not been molested. You know, even the paintwork, it's got that patina to it, kind of, you know, looks like a Marlboro or, you know, a Yamaha. That's perfect to leave, you know. One thing I had with my other ones, I had some new bodywork, and I just couldn't get around to what colour to paint it, you know, and so I sold it with about 3 sets of new bodywork. I can't believe how much them bodywork must cost now these days. But like I say, going back to the tyres, I don't know if you can see that, but these are completely dry rotted. See the cracks there? And I'm hoping, really hoping, that a good friend of mine, Kay, who sort of collects these and has got a few bits for them, I'm just really hoping that she might let me have a tyre, you know, whatever it costs. I'll be more than happy to buy a new tyre for this bike. That's if she'll let them go, because I know a lot of collectors, you know, want to hang on to stuff. But, you know, there's no pressure. It's just, you know, if I get one, I'm lucky. If I don't, I'll have to do something with these. And the other thing with this one, here. Can you see that flat spot which is on there? This wheel will spin. There, look, you can see it. I mean, it's not, I don't think that's going to come out. It must have been sitting on there for God knows how long. I mean, the guy I bought it off, Jim, nice fella, said he's had this since he was like 14, and he's 48 now, and he'd always wanted to run it or get an engine, because I think he bought it, I don't think he bought it sort of new, I think he bought it second hand, because he said he'd never run it, and there's a few little marks on it, not a lot. I mean, let's take the body off. Right. Now, if you look, there's not a lot of wear on the disc, you know. It's not been used a lot. I'm lucky because this is like the one that came with the steering damper, no, not steering damper, the front fork damper and the disc. They've done 2 versions. They've done like the one with the damper and the disc, like option parts that come complete like that, which I'm lucky to have, you know, because not easy to find. And they did one without a front disc, and they just relied on the rear brake, which is there, which all kind of works off the mechanism of the servos. I mean, it's got servos in there. I think they're probably Vitava. You know, it operates the brake and the throttle up and down. And we go back to the servo situation. I don't know if you can see in there, there's 2 little alley discs, and they go on the servo horns and they allow the steering to rock. See? Can you? That is how they used to steer, transfer the weight from one side to the other. This is just floating. Let's have another look at that tyre. I don't know if you can see it better. Oh, the camera's not picking it up really. There's a few there, but it's in poor condition. Yeah, I'm just going. Oh, I can see the servos. What are they? JR. Yeah, JR servos. They are NS 505. Sort of ran about the time of Vitava, the 301s and 128s, all that kind of thing. But you know, I'm over the moon with this. The parts that are probably going to change, hopefully a new tyre. I've got an engine for it, which, like an idiot, I've not brought it out here with me. I don't know if I'm going to run it. It's a Pico. Most of these had a Pico in them, 21, like proper racing car engine, you know, not your cooking engine, a proper full race engine. And these would fit across the frame in there. Let's move this body out of the way. They would normally have an SG crank or some sort of ground crank and it will come out here and run on this spur gear. Now I think I've got the 2 engine mounts missing in there, but it's no big deal. I think they're adjustable if you can change the gear ratios with a spur and the pinion like that, so it's moving. But look at these crash bars back in the day. That kind of hardly been run. I can tell that because there's hardly any digs on there. There's a few on the other side. These tanks were prone to leak. I would imagine that rubber seal in there is absolute toast. I think I made one before. I had some rubber and I actually made one up. But it's made for quick release. So you undo this little clip here, pull that down, swing it to one side, put your fuel in, the cap stays where it is, you slide it back fast and you pop that back in. So, a very quick pit stop. So that's what I'm saying about this. It was a competition motorcycle, you know. Weren't just to sort of run around the car park like I'm going to do. It was in a, you know, proper competition. They thought out how they could do a quick fuel change just by unclipping it and throwing it back, clipping it back up again. Very clever idea. But over the years, these seals, they tend to deteriorate, same as what the tyre's done. And so you have to kind of change that. I believe these were even troublesome when they were new. So I think a lot of guys back in the day probably made their own tanks up, you know. But you can see where it swivels on the back there. I don't want to undo it just yet because I want to see what condition that's in. But you can see that steering again on the front there. You can say you got, you know, it was such a force. You had 2 servos driving that. Nowadays probably you could have one, you know, because servo world has changed completely. You know, you get such powerful servos now. But what I intend to do, like I did on my other one, these servos, you can put 2 servos up here, 2 mounts to go across, 2 servos up there, and you actually spring load them up to these little pieces on here, which is the top kind of like a plastic mount there, probably for a bearing. But I believe I put 2 on there. Now you can either have 1, or I think most people, I think when you bought the kit you had 2 steering rods. I think I might have even drilled it a bit further out, but they come back to the servos. So when you have 2 servos, so when they move like that, it'll pull the steering that way and the bike leans that way, and then the wheel follows it round. And the tighter you have the spring tension, the more reactive the bike is. So, you know, when you're learning, you try and have them springs a little bit loose just to make it like a little bit stable so you can do a couple of circuits. But when you're racing, you tighten them up more and more and more, and you get like an instant whack over that way, and then the bike will fall onto its side, the wheel follows it round, and that's the way, you know, that's the way they steer. Also, they had the front brake. This was linked up, well, where's it gone? Right, the front brake here, that was linked up, it's a disc brake, that was linked up to the throttle servo. So you had the rear brake off the throttle servo, you actually had the throttle servo doing the throttling, and you had another arm of it which did the front brake. Now, that's all good, and you know, but with today's radio, what I did on the last one, I made a little bracket here, and I made the front brake work off a very small servo in there. So you can use a brake mix on your radio, which back in the day you didn't have. So if you use a brake mix, you can have the servo and the brake separately. So you know, instead of having to try and work out the throttle movement, the rear brake movement and the front movement, you can just do the front brake, the rear brake and the throttle, and you can put the front disc onto a small servo in there, so you can adjust that front disc, you know, without having to change the throttle. It's on its own, and you can put a brake mix on your transmitter, and you can set this up and get your front brake working like quicker than faster than you do the rear. It makes it a completely separate item, and you just set that to what you want on the brake. And exactly the same as my other one, the forks are seized up. Oh, they're just starting to move. Now, it's either the oil and stamper gone to jelly, or They get rust on these. I believe the front forks are aluminium. Not kind of the best thing for a front fork if you ever head on with something, but I think they were quite strong. The alley sort of deteriorates over the years and they get furred up. My other one was exactly the same. You can't, you know, it's trying, but you can adjust the spring tension. Obviously you've got these little things here, adjust the front brake, lots of things. This damper, you know, it's to find one with that on is fantastic, you know. Whether this has been raced, I don't know. It doesn't look like it. I've got the trim pipe with it. Now the exhaust on these, so there's always a little bit of a hit and miss type of arrangement. You really, with this bike, you wanted like a side exhaust Pico. You know, I mean, back in the day in the cars, you know, you wouldn't have a side exhaust, you'd have a rear exhaust. But in the bikes, it makes it very awkward to have a rear exhaust in here. So if you can imagine, you've got the bike laying down and you've got the engine going across that way. So the exhaust comes out here, you know. So what they did is you had like a pipe that come out of here, it went up here, through that hole and connected up to the exhaust. It's quite an ugly looking thing. So everyone went for like the side exhaust engine. Now I have got a Pico for this, but guess what? It's not side exhaust. And the engine's got pretty good compression and it looks like new. And I've managed to find on eBay, I found the manifold, the rubber bit that comes up here and into there, which I'm not a fan of, but thing was, it came with the other part that went in there, and it's come with another trim pipe, which you know, is always handy. You know, if I see DWA spares, I'll tend to buy them if I can, as long as the price is not too bad, you know. So I've got another pipe coming. I've got the manifold that goes in there, and I've got the one that comes down here. So I could fit my engine if I wanted to. But I'm going to keep looking to see if I can find a side exhaust. I believe you can put an OPS in it. One of them vintage engines, you know, Mondial, OPS. Pico was the one that most people put in this one. And you know, if I can't find a rear exhaust, a side exhaust, at least I've got the parts to run a rear exhaust, you know. But it's not ideal because it doesn't look very nice coming out there, and the rubber tends to split, it tends to come off. So I don't know what I'm going to receive off eBay, but hopefully it's not going to be too bad. So it's given me another choice. I've got a choice now of side exhaust or rear exhaust. At the moment I'm with rear exhaust because that's the engine I've got, but I'm hoping one's going to turn up. But you know, these vintage car engines, you know, they are so hard to find, and you know, guys want so much money for them, and you think, oh, it's got to be new, and they say, oh, it's lightly used, you know. And I was lucky with the other one. I found an engine, you know, that was side exhaust. It was a Pico side exhaust and looked like it hardly ever been run. All I had to do was replace the bearings as usual. But the one I've got now, it's got like reasonable compression. If I get a piston liner for it, it'd be really good. But the chances of finding a piston liner, you know, is pretty, well, what do I say? I doubt if I find one, but I've said that so many times before, you know, about stuff. Oh, I'm never going to get this, I'm never going to get that. And then one will turn up, or someone will say, oh, I know someone's got one of them, and that goes to someone else and someone else, and sort of goes all around the houses, and I find myself finding a new tyre or a new body or something like that. That's what happened to the RB7, the Red Bull one that I'm doing up, the 7th scale. To get a body for that, I had to ask a seller. He had found someone else, and someone else said I knew someone else, and eventually I got a body for that, which I painted, and I've got the decals now, so I've got to cut them out and put them on. But this has come along in the meantime because I've been waiting some time for the decals. I've got a guy in the States made them for me, and they're very good. So this turned up, and I just had to have it. obviously it's all going to be taken apart. I'm hoping to keep all the screws, you know, the crosshead screws like we got in here, trying to keep them all the same, not polish it up too much, just give it a good clean. Servos, I don't know whether I'm going to use them servos. I might just use, you know, some newer ones. I don't know. I mean, if they work all right, maybe they'd be okay. But these are quite big. You know, look how close that is to the front wheel. You know, although I'm not going to use this setup, I'm going with the 2 on the top. But you know that these are quite bulky, and you could probably buy some cheaper, more powerful servos. As long as they're black, you know, they're getting all fancy now with blinking anodise this and anodise that. I don't know, you know, they might work fine. You know, I'll have to look up the spec of them, you know, from the 90s. God knows what they are. I bet they're just normal cooking servos. They're nothing special. And no one sort of thought of that back in the old days. I remember when I was racing 8-scale buggies, we all used like a normal servo, you know, 128 and all that on the steering, and then it suddenly started sticking these, you remember the brick servo, the huge like quarter-scale servo, we managed to nail them in. And then Vitava started bringing out the small high-power servos, which were very temperamental, but it didn't take any room up. And now the power you got out your servo, just like, you know, brilliant. Like, you could probably fit one in there, but I think I'll dig out my old pictures. I think I've got an old manual of this with deconversion in the top. And I think I'll try and copy it to the letter and make it 2 servos. I'm sort of finding it hard to remember now, but you know, my memory's not as good as it was, even though it was only like probably 5 years ago. So anyway, I better wrap this up. I'll just show you the rear suspension. There's no oil in that. That's a little oil damper in there. I believe it's got like a solid metal piston. Or it's trying to damp. I can feel it clonking. But I believe that to run some really thick oil in that, if I can imagine. But you know, it's only got a little bit of surface rust on it. You know, I think that'll clean up really nice. And this is really good at like duralumin. It's not your cheap bendy stuff. It's like really good quality, which seems to be very hard to find these days. All carbon fibre, you know, if you wanted to, you can make all them plates out of carbon, but I don't want to. I want to keep it as it is. I'll probably replace some of these rusty screws, I've got plenty of new ones. But I'll try and keep all the crosshead screws and everything the same, all the lamps. You had the switch on the back here, which I always thought was a bit suspect, because these bikes do tend to wheelie, you know. You wouldn't believe it from back in the day, but they do. Terrific amount of power out of a Pico. I forget what they are, what horsepower they are, but they rev to like 30,000, 34,000. You know, and I love a nitro engine, as you know. So I'm going to wind this video up now, and I'm going to crack on tearing this apart out in the sunshine. And I might lay this one out. I'll get it all clean, and I'll lay it all out before I put it back together again, and just show you the workings and what's inside it. But it's a lovely thing. I'm so lucky to get it for the price that I got it for, and I'm not going to sell this one. I mean it. This is going to be one to stay. You know, I've got a lot of history with these bikes, and I can remember when I bought the first one, and I can remember when I got the second one, like it was yesterday. You know, and going back to the 90s when I got my very first one. So, there it is, guys. I'm going to wrap this one up. Hope you like it, and I'll see you in the next one.